So documentation is the last step. It's important for us to start from the ground, and there it is a little bit of a personal journey also, where I am trained as a planner, and I'm trained to work in a technocratic manner, and I've done that at least till strongly, exclusively till the year 2014, where I was constructing plans for cities which were looking at the city from a distance, and as a planner I would see the city from a distance without seeing any of the realities of the city and plan for the city. And then starting 1993 to 2014, I have done that, and I realized that plans have very little validity simply because we are not engaging with the ground. The everyday city that we see on the ground is not what reflects in the plan, because we are not even getting down to the ground. So what we start to do is engage with the ground, and the ground is of various hues and shades, right? So it can be, for example, the colony I live in, or it can also be the village behind my house, Vinayak Nagar. And accessing these two is very difficult in many ways, especially the ones which are impoverished or the resource-constrained environments. Typically, we access those through people who have a relationship. So many times, NGOs, civil society organizations are already working. The state cannot reach these places. There is a lack, all that I spoke about, lack of choices, lack of services, impoverishment actually is very visible there. And in the absence of the state, the non-state actor actually begins to fill in. And those become our partners on one side, and the state becomes another partner on the other side. How do you bridge these? Because these are two ends of the continuum. We are sitting somewhere in the center. Then it's a story that builds up over a period of time, and we start to document, we start to understand. And slum A in Bhopal has very different requirements from slum B in Bhopal itself, right? Because one is located next to a railway line, and their challenges are very different from another one which is located next to the Bada Talab over there, and those challenges are very different, right? For one, it's noise pollution and air pollution. For the other, it is water flooding that is bothering them. So we have to construct these stories from the ground. So even again, to say that the ground also, so I say we engage with the ground, but the ground itself is not very homogeneous, and one variation we see is along income groups, right? So that's how the policy actually constructed, to say that it is middle income, high income, low income communities. But even within the low income communities, there are many variations, as there are between middle and high income communities. So in our engagement with the ground that we started, we realized that even the informal settlements are various types, right? And that is strongly linked to their evolution. When did they start? How did they start? So just to give you an idea, many a times, especially in the Indian context, cities actually grow by eating up the villages, right? So, but the villages don't lose their character completely. So there are some of these urban, what is beginning to get recognized in formal planning, the whole typology of urban villages. So when you see an urban village, I showed you the photograph of Dharwad, right? Where there is there's a small shrine. So in the villages or urban villages, you realize that these are traditional settlements. There has always been a provision of open spaces. There are much wider roads. There is some sort of facilities. You start at a higher level where you start the improvement process. But then you also have what we call squatter-turned slum settlements, right? So that would have typically started, say, next to the railway line, 1 or 2 houses, or next to a lake, low-lying area where 1 or 2 houses will come, and slowly that will grow to a much larger settlement, say, of 200 to 400 houses. Now, there's a visible difference between these urban villages and these squatter-turned slum settlements. These will have very narrow streets, for example. Sometimes they won't have any streets at all. The scope for open spaces is minimal in these areas. The street itself becomes an extension of the house, right? So in the urban villages, the houses themselves are a little older, a little larger. And they are, of course, older also. But in the slum, squatter-turned slum settlements, the houses are very, very tiny. The street itself becomes an extension of the house. It also serves as a dynamic, fluid space, open space, where a lot of functions, a lot of even the marriages, even cooking on an everyday basis happens on the street, right? People actually spill out and do the morning, evening cooking there. In the night, people sleep on the street. So that's, those are some of the visible differences that we see in urban villages as well as the squatter turned slum settlements. These are definitely very difficult, much more difficult spaces to start working with, because then also the psychology of the people, right? Here you will find a lot more security, because while there has been a change in your habitats, but it has not been that you've been completely uprooted from a locality as far as, say, Jharkhand or Bhopal or northeast, where you're coming from, squatting on a piece of land and literally struggling every day for survival. Here, the journey is very, very different. Yeah? So those are some of the visible, tangible and non-tangible differences that we see. So see, we are also awaiting a few details on the whole project, so that hasn't really come out. But on one hand, the project was conceived in 2004. After literally 20 years, there are two ways to look at it. One is that the slum itself is spread out. It's a city in itself. It's got about 16,000 micro enterprises that exist within that area. So that will definitely, to me, will be definitely a problem of going vertical. But there are alternatives, but I think they also need to understand that is where the problem will really exist, because to what extent, when they are doing the redevelopment, what extent do they really understand how people are living and how they need to be accommodated? Because you can accommodate them as you go higher, right? But you need to provide those spaces in many ways. It needs a lot more than just a physical intervention. It needs a lot of working with the people on the ground to say what is needed, what is not needed. So I am not too sure how, because if it is conceived purely, and I think that's how it is, purely as a real estate project, where he is going to get a lot of TDR, that's the transfer of development rights. He is going to get a lot of floor area ratio, which he's going to use it in other parts of the city. It's prime land in the heart of the city. It's a lot of land, right? So that's why the project has been alive for 20 years and everybody's been fighting for it. At the same time, I think if there is no way that it will go ahead, and if that is the case, I think to rethink some very fundamental things. One is, what you're saying, how do you accommodate people vertically and their needs, but also, for example, the size of the house. Here is a private developer who's coming in. The government says the size of the house should be 300 square feet to 600 square feet. That's like really it's like a whole, right? And just because people are poor doesn't mean they don't need space. They need space like any of us. They need good environment like any of us. So why not rethink through that idea of the house itself also? Why not go all 600, keep that as the minimum, 600, and go upwards up till 800 square feet and things like that. So these are some of the things that I think they can think through if they are going ahead. So I think, so in a very honest answer, if you ask me, the whole indicators business is just a business and nothing else, right? So it is something that is getting funded by the multilaterals, the bilaterals, and there is a whole ecosystem around it which is operating. You want to know how indicators work? Government of India, Government of Karnataka started with what it calls service level benchmarks, right? And it was positioned as a very successful exercise. It's essentially what the state tries to do. Governments at various scales, they need these indicators so they can really understand the city as a whole. Otherwise, they don't have any metrics. Sitting in Vidhan Sauda, if I look at the indicators, I am able to say Jayanagar has a very good indicator vis-a-vis Shivaji Nagar, which doesn't have a good indicator, right? So it makes my job as a officer or IS officer sitting in Vidhan Sabha, it makes my job very easy, right? Does it really speak to the ground? No. So to go back to the example, service level benchmarks, 180 liters per capita per day, the government has to give this water to everybody in, say, the city of Dharwad. Now, the government, how do they arrive at these indicators? And this is a first-hand experience. If I tell that I am giving this kind of water, I will get more money because I'll be positioned as a good municipality. So who is going to check it? right? There is no way of checking this. That's one. Second, the whole methodology is so centralized and is so driven by numbers that it really doesn't capture any of the nuances on the ground. And all these indicators are completely, so it went to the national level, all cities are doing it today. There's very little sense around it. And it doesn't speak at all about what's happening on the ground, right? So I think for many of us as a planner, there's no tension, because immediately you're dissing it off and saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't even constitute a data set for me to understand cities. It's not, it's that macro. So if I was to say I want to rely on these indicators to understand Bangalore vis-a-vis Mysore, it's giving me a completely faulty picture. I don't even want to rely on it. Right? So I don't think there's any tension around it. Municipalities themselves, a Mysore municipality will say, here is a report that I want to show Government of Karnataka, Vidhan Sabha, Bangalore, and here's a report that I'm going to keep for myself, which is the truth, and this will tell us what I want to do with. And these reports are there, existing on the tables in the municipalities. So I think there's a very palpable tension in that. It's an idea that actually cities across the world are pushing for now, right? So they don't want agriculture happening somewhere outside, because then every day you will be getting vegetables in. Your vehicles will be contributing to the greenhouse gases, and that in turn then reflects on your indices on climate mitigation or adaptation. So that's the newest baby that all of us are talking to. Now, the thing is that what happens inside the city is not at a large scale. You see, for example, many of these, it's a decentralized way of looking at food production, which may just, for example, service a particular locality or 2 or 3 localities around it, right? Palpable tension is not in terms of, mechanizing it or the level of production, but how do you retain it as a local economy in the city? Because obviously it needs a lot of work, and what people get out of it, especially those who grow, is very minimal, and they are not able to suffice on it, right? So even in cities that we have seen it, whether it was Dharwad, Bhopal, Ranchi, or some of the cities, other cities that we have worked with, one of the and that's why I say it's a palpable tension, because people actually tell you that we are seeing, for example, there's a tension between rental income. So I'll put up a room in my house and that'll give me so much more money, right? Vis-a-vis the agriculture, which is going to just kill me, but then I'm not getting too much money. So I think that's where policy becomes the role of the state becomes very critical. How do you incentivize agricultural production in the city for the city, right? And make sure that people do it, because also we must remember that these are people who have been practicing agriculture for generations. They know how to do it. That's the only thing they know how to do it. So if you remove this economy, they will get absorbed in an informal sector, say daily wage workers, right? So in any ways, you're creating that informality in the process. So why not, for example, there is a huge economy around the milk production and milk and milk product that's happening in Dharwad. How do you incentivize it? How do you keep it in the city? And it's not very difficult. You don't need to close a lake over there. You don't need to, all you need to do is put collection points for the milk, put distribution points for the milk, and make it easier for people who are doing it, right? Anyways, you're getting it all over from somewhere 5, 10, 15, 20 kilometers away. You might as well rely on something that is in the city. But that the government will only be able to do if they know that it exists. That's the fundamental problem. They don't know that it exists over there, right? If they know it exists, it's an eyesore, it's something informal. It does not align with my idea of a modernized city, and I want to push it away. What I want is let's say a 15-story real estate project there. That's modern. That's what a city is. I think that's a difficult one to answer, because we try to do that. We try to bridge this gap with the state. At least I try to do that a lot in my work, because I have been on the other side of the table. Yeah. So, but it all depends on actually the person you're speaking to. And that is a huge issue in our governance machinery. If I get a good IS officer on the other side, things will just move very fast, right? And because somebody's got eyes and ears which are working. It's as simple as that. So I'm able to get across messages. I'm able to tell them that, look, you can do this, you can do that, and it can proceed. But they get transferred out, right? So everything falls flat on its face. So somewhere, one of the things that we are also constantly asking for is that how do you de-link decision-making from the individual, right? So it's the Department of Planning which is making a decision and not the Commissioner Planning who's making the decision. They're two different things. So you need to de-link those. And there was a movement sometimes in the 2010, 2011, where decision rooms were specially enabled by technology, where all decisions were being recorded. Technology will help us to actually allow us to see some of these and therefore bring in transparency. It didn't really work because the system is very entrenched. But if there is a good IAS officer, I think it can be possible to bridge this gap. But that's only, if you ask me, a very short-term solution. What you do need is a systemic change in the way we see our cities, right? And that is our acts, our laws, everything needs an overhaul. There is an acknowledgement for it. The Niti Aayog right now has brought in a huge document saying the need for urban reforms in India. And they're working towards it. But I think what we also need to understand is that this is a system. We say it got entrenched post-independence, but actually we are carrying the colonial legacy. So in many ways, it's much, much longer. It's like 200, 300, and it'll take time to destabilize. But more the voices, more the effort, perhaps quicker it'll be easy to nudge it, I think. Change is far off. To begin with, theoretically, I do believe that collaboration is very important, right? In the kind of challenges we face, it's not possible for the state alone to resolve it. But the state has to be the primary stakeholder which actually steers the wheel. Because if an Adani comes in, Adani's job is to make profit. They will make profit. It's the state's job to actually do welfare. And the state needs to do that. That's where the problem is, because when you're looking at this whole set of intermediaries, think tanks, whatever you want to call them, you are not involving them as partners, you're outsourcing them, right? So you, on one hand, absolve your responsibility and say, somebody else is doing it. Now, that somebody else doesn't have the same lens. I think in Bangalore, there has been a lot of elite capture of public policy, which is not a good thing. And that's why our cities are, even Bangalore for that matter is rolling much faster the neoliberal way than any other city in the country. I don't have, it's only anecdotal and my own experience across it, but it is very, very elitist over here. The think tanks, it's a wonderful opportunity for the state as long as the state knows how to make them work for the city and not for their respective areas or their respective themes that they are looking at, right? So a tender shore is wonderful. A flyover in electronic city perhaps was a great idea, but it only services one segment of the city. Then there are that kind of money put into that kind of infrastructure project is it's not going to service the city as a whole. What it will service is a lot of people who are anyways well off, right? And in the process, you're creating a lot of rift between the haves and the have-nots, which is, I think, something that needs to be questioned.